Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to see you, so many of you. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce today's speaker to the departmental seminar series, Professor Ella Daniel. Ella is currently a visiting researcher from Tel Aviv University at the department. We've met last year, I believe, in a Zoom call. And when Ella introduced the idea to me of visiting the department, I was, of course, needless to say, over the moon. And it's been a real pleasure having you already here so far. And Ella's here until the summer term, right? So please, if you haven't had a chance yet to chat with her and hear about the research and talk to her, please I do invite you to do so. We have this very nice segment in the beginning where Ella will walk us through your non-ghost CV, as we've just established. I do want to emphasize that Ella is no stranger to moving. She got her master's and her PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, when she graduated in 2011, then transitioned with family to the University of Toronto for a 3-year postdoc, and in 2014 returned to Israel to take on a lectureship position at Tel Aviv University, where in 2014, you started it, and in 2018, appointed senior lecturer, associate professor at Tel Aviv University. And I'm so much looking forward to your talk, Ella. We have questions, of course, at the very end, naturally. Well, again, invite especially the junior colleagues to kick off the question session. And also, of course, afterwards, please still feel free to help yourself to coffee and tea in the back. But for now, thank you so much for giving your talk today. I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about your research. Thank you.
So hello everyone, and thank you for coming, and thank you for having me in this department, this university, and today in the seminar here. And I'm having so much fun, so thank you for inviting me to share with you a bit of my fun. So my name is Ella, and I've been asked to describe my career pathway, and it led me to thinking, like, what is supposed to be suggested here? What should I talk about? Should I talk about my personal pathway and how that intersects with actually having an academic career? Or should I talk about all the wonderful successes I have acquired over the years, as is expected? Or shall I talk about my ghost CV, all the things that I have not received, all the fellowships I didn't get, or the grants I didn't receive? I decided to be conventional, but I do ask, if I'm here to talk to young scholars, I do ask you to see that as what it is, an edited version of a pathway, basically. So I started at Ben-Gurion University. That's actually a very small university at the south of Israel, and I chose to come there because they had this really unique program of behavioral science, looking at psychology and sociology and anthropology, and I said I want to see individuals as widely as possible. Let's at least start there. I moved on to the Hebrew University of Jerusalem for a master's in social science. With an intention, through the process, I moved to developmental psych quite gradually. And my supervisor sometimes remind me of how I came to him, like out of the blue, before he knew me at all. And I told him, I want to study individuals and how they are related to their societies. And in a way, I think that's still what I'm doing today. I moved to the University of Toronto. I had this wonderful opportunity to study there as a postdoctoral fellow. And I think there my transition was really completed. I got some more expertise in moral development, in development within the family context, but mostly I think what I received there was methodological training in longitudinal design, data analysis for data-sensitive data sets, for time-sensitive data sets, and that's something that I'm still taking on today. And then I got to Tel Aviv University, and I was very lucky to get my position and start my social development lab. And we studied, for the past few years, we studied value development. We studied both how individuals come to acquire values, specifically in middle childhood, but also how cognition and language and social cognition is contributing to this process. And I feel truly fortunate because next year I'm about to start a new project looking at value transmission. It is an ERC-funded grant, so it will be truly big and exciting, and can't wait. And I'm terrified at the same time, of course. And we'll look at family context and social media context of value development. And now let's go to today. So what I want to present to you today is the theory of values that I'm working with, the theory of personal values. And I want to claim that it is a theory that is relevant to middle childhood, that children can have values and do have values, but also tell you why I think they do not, and what are the limits of this understanding. So this is the plan for today, and we'll start with the theory of personal values. So I'm working with a theory by Professor Sharon Schwartz. This theory describes values as abstract end states, abstract goals that individuals aspire to pursue in their lives. So any abstract goal that can be trans-situational, that can be general, is a part of your value system. These values are an important aspect of one's identity or even the personality. So it is a typical way we value things. We think something is important. And because we think something is important, because it is a motivational aspect of personality, this is something that we use in order to motivate evaluation, to motivate judgment, motivate even attention, but of course also motivate behavior. So values are a driving force toward behavior, social behavior, but also other behaviors. What is unique about the theory is that it's not just listing values. It is trying to define the entire continuum of values, saying that there are some motivations that appear across individuals, across societies, and the theory was validated in hundreds of samples in over 80 countries to date, I think. So it is quite general. It describes values across this continuum and says that there are basic underlying motivations from which we can derive different values. So maybe in one language, we'll call it honesty, and in Hebrew, I'll call it kenut. But it will be the same underlying motivation to be honest with the people around me. And this is derived from a general motivation to be caring and gentle and give to the people who are close to me. And this underlying general motivation can be passed in multiple ways. I can tell you that there are two underlying dimensions, bipolar dimensions, that can be found across cultures. And these motivations can also be passed differently. For example, here to 10 different values. So it's the same continuum, just instead of looking at two bipolar dimensions, I'm looking at 10 different values. But the basic bipolar dimensions contrast values that are difficult to have together. So all values are desirable, but it's usually necessary to have some kind of a choice, because these values are difficult to pursue at the same time. For example, if I really value openness to change, I want to be independent and autonomous, creative, think for myself, have new experiences or adventures. It's quite hard to do that while also maintaining conformity, doing as I'm told, maintaining traditions, and being really safe. Hey, it's hard to pursue them at the same time. If I'm behaving in a way that promotes independence, it's likely to also promote adventurousness, but it is also likely to hinder my safety. So people have to make a list of priorities, what is more important to them and what is less important. A second bipolar dimension contrasts values that are usually considered to be more moral, self-transcendence values, so caring for the people around me, close individuals, but also the general world, social justice, people that I don't know, and the natural world as well. So these are values that are focused on caring for others, even sometimes at the expense of myself. And it is considered to be, in a way, conflictual with caring for my own interests. gaining control over resources, gaining control over other people, gaining recognition for others. So here again, we have a contradiction. So this is the theory of values. And when I started my work, no, that's going backwards. When I started my work, it was usually studied in adults, and until today, it is mostly studied among adults. And I wanted to know whether it is relevant to development. Where does it come from, basically? And back then, the Raymond theory, and not because I'm that old, was still the Ericksonian theory, saying that values appear in adolescence. Adolescents start exploring their identity, making sure they know what is important to them and not to the people around them, and then they have values. However, we know that young children already have goal-directed behavior. They behave in a way that is maintained by their internal goals. Theories of personality and identity already say that a motivational aspect of personality appears in middle childhood. So children can already reflect on their own motivations and say, this is what I want. So can there be values already in middle childhood? The first step to answer this question was taken by a group from Munster. And what they did basically is they created a questionnaire that is applicable to children. Until then, the questionnaires were quite abstract and general. So from 1 to 9, what do you think? How important is it for you to pursue social justice? Obviously, you don't ask a 6-year-old that question. So what they did, they created small vignettes or pictures that describe behaviors that are in line with specific values, and they added captions that describe the values that are there, and they asked children to rank these 20 vignettes, 20 pictures in order of importance, how it describes what is important to you in your life and less important. And children actually have a hoot doing that. They really like it. That, of course, does not mean that it is a valid measure of a valid construct, right? So let's try and explore and understand, because I was quite skeptical at the beginning. I wasn't sure what exactly are they measuring here. And I went on a path to try and explore that and understand it. And I want to take you on that path with me for a minute, a few minutes actually, if you will. So how do children answer this questionnaire, and what are they answering about? So I want to introduce you to the sample I've been collecting for the last 4 years, I guess. It is a longitudinal sample of children in Israel, almost 300 children. Thank you, COVID, for attrition, but at least because it's COVID related, it is completely organizational and not at the level of, there's no bias in children who chose to not participate. But we do have a sizable sample over the years. We turn to them since they were in the 1st and 2nd grade in Israel, that's 6 to 8 years of age. And we return to them repeatedly 4 times. Every time, every year, until they were 9 to 11 at the last time point. So first, is the measure reliable? Do children just toss around their pictures? Or do they actually think about it enough so that when we return to them a year later, they give similar answers? Among adults, we find reliability ranging between 0.5 and 0.8, depending on the value and the length of time. The longest one was, I think, 8 years. So children's average test-retest association over a year was substantially lower. It was 0.49, but not that substantially lower. Think about it. It's like 6 to 7 years old the first time, but that's really high. So for me, that was a bit of a surprise. They are quite reliable in their answers, even after 3 years. So after the 4th time point, already the average test-retest association is 0.27. So there's quite high reliability there, considering that it's young children over a long period of time. So they don't just toss around pictures. What about the meaning of the values? Do they mean something that is similar to what we know? So one way to understand that is to compare it to measures that we know and populations that we know. And there's something interesting about values of adults. And no one actually hypothesized that at the beginning. But when we look at samples across the world, we found quite high, I forgot a word, sorry, my English. They have similar priorities of values. So the hierarchy of values is quite similar across cultures. Values such as benevolence, so care for the people who are close to you, are usually considered to be very high in importance. Values such as power are usually quite low in importance across samples across the world. So I took here 2 samples. One of them in teal here, the turquoise is a representative adult sample from Israel to be just a comparison sample. In orange, you can see an adolescent sample from a different study we had, again in Israel. I ordered the importance of the values, went, again, the other direction, from most important to least important. Just the order, you don't need the names, just see how it is descending now down from the most important value to the least important value. We can see already that the adolescents do not have the same order of importance. So adolescents love the hedonism and the stimulation, it's quite higher. And we see that consistently across samples. Self-direction and achievement is also a bit higher in the level of importance than for adults. What happens when we compare that to children? So this is the child sample. So again, the same order of values. And we can see that the order of values that is constructed for the adults is quite good at characterizing the order of values, the rank from most important to least important of the children as well. It's actually even better for the children than the adolescents. So the children like the adolescents value hedonism and stimulation higher than expected, but other deviations we do not find. So we see that children already can value values in a predictable manner. So values that are most important across the world are also important for children, such as benevolence values. Values such as power are not as important. And a last test of validity, let's look at predictive validity. One of the main reasons that values are important, in my account at least, is that they are predictive of behavior. And values of adults are predictive of behavior consistently in experimental as well as in correlational studies. And we wanted to know what happens among children. Can children use their values, even if they have them, in order to direct social behavior? And studies started coming out in the last 5 years. And in many of them, we find that both peer-reported behaviors and observed behaviors are associated with children's values. We do not yet have experimental studies, so I don't know if values are drivers of behavior or behavior is a driver of values or something else is going on. But as a proxy for that, in the meantime, let's look at associations over time. So longitudinally, do values predict behavior? Does behavior predict values? So this is our measure of behavior. It is prosocial behavior, a sharing task. Basically, we give children stickers and we ask them to share the stickers with an unknown child. And we have 2 configurations. So children have to choose among 2 options. Either you can get 2 stickers and the other gets none, or you get 1 sticker and the other gets a sticker as well. So that's costly sharing. It costs you some resources to be caring. This is the non-costly sharing option. Either you get 2 stickers and the other gets none, or you get 2 stickers and the other gets 1. That's really mean, isn't it? That's much harder to say no to. So we have the 2 options of costly sharing and non-costly sharing. And we're looking at association between values and these behaviors. Will children share or not share? This is a cross-legged panel model. So a cross-legged panel model basically says that we are looking at the same values and behaviors over time. We test them time 1, 2, etc. And we model all the associations concurrently. So that, what does it mean? We look at continuity in both values and behavior. the same children who help at time 1 will share at time 1 are likely to also share at time 2. We also look at concurrent association. So what happens at the same time? Time 1, self-transcendence is associated with time 1, costly sharing behavior. But most importantly, we are looking at the cross-lagged associations. And because we already controlled for both the concurrent associations and the continuity, what remains here is an association with change. So time 1 self-transcendence values is predicting the change in behavior beyond previous time points. Is that clear? So basically what we see is that values predict behavior, but we do not see the opposite association. Values motivate behavior, but behaviors do not change values. When we look at non-costly sharing behavior, non-surprisingly, we don't find the same association. You need your values to motivate a difficult behavior. That is either norm or just too easy to happen, like why not? So my first point will be, do children have values? I'm quite convinced. It seems as if they are answering reliably, they are reporting something that we seem to know from other measures, and they are also reporting a construct that is meaningful for their actual behavior. And I believe that has huge meaning. It has huge meaning in order to understand how children motivate themselves in their lives. You can already approach children from 6 years of age and understand it in terms of their values. And they seem to understand themselves in terms of their values. They can reflect on what motivates them, what is important to them, and how they want to direct their lives. I think that is an important lesson for research, but also for practice and for education. But of course, that's not the entire picture, isn't it? It can't be that easy. So when I started working with these measures, I kept feeling uneasy about the fact that it's not really necessarily the same thing. And I really wanted to try, and I think a lot of what we do in developmental psychology is trying to understand the boundaries of constructs. So when do children master the construct partially? When do they master it in full? And how do they progress in that process? So a lot of what I did in the last few years was to try and understand these boundaries of the values construct. So what can children do? What can they not do? And how do they develop between the two states? So I want to show you one glimpse of how I do that. So this is one method. I have a few of them. I might, if I'll have the time, I'll tell you a bit about the rest. But this is one of the ways I look at changes in the values construct with development. So one of the strengths and one of the difficulties of values are the fact that they are part of this elaborate structure, which is quite a lot, isn't it? You don't have to explicitly understand the values construct, the value structure in order to have values. You can have that implicitly, and most people have it implicitly. But can really children have that even implicitly? All these complex associations, things that are compatible, things that are conflictual, can they really hold that? We know that in middle childhood, across multiple contexts, children are improving in their ability to make comparisons, to integrate constructs, to see things from different perspectives. So if we look at emotions, children become better in acknowledging both positive and negative emotions at the same time. If we look at perspectives, they understand more than one perspective to the same situation. If you look at morality, they can reconcile different considerations. So what will happen with values as children are learning to create such a more complex behavior? Thank you. It took me a while to find a way to test that hypothesis that children will develop in their understanding of the value structure over time. And when I found this method, I was like, Eureka! And completely excited because it's a method that exists for a while, but was never applied in this way. It is called unfolding analysis. And what it does basically, it is mapping multiple constructs at the same time into a spatial map. So what do? Basically, we take the individuals, we ask them to rate or rank multiple constructs. Their association with each one of the constructs for each individual can be manifested in how close or far away they are from that specific construct on the map. So if we look, for example, at that individual over here, each one of these points is an individual in the sample. That individual over here is located here because they ranked hedonism values as super important. They ranked tradition and security values as not important as much. Okay? The individual over here decided that achievement values are very important for them, and self-direction values not as much. Basically, the map is constructed in a bottom-up way in which both individuals are located in the map and the values are located across them. So the only reason this map is creating a circle here, basically, that you don't see, but you do see it in a computer, the only way there is a circle around here of values around the individuals is because people who value one value highly are likely to be farther away, to not value the value that is conflicting with it. If people would not have this internal structure themselves, this structure of values around people would not emerge. That's what I mean by a bottom-up structure. But more than that, obviously, this is a two-dimensional representation of a really, really complex mental structure. That's why not every one of the individuals is well represented. That map is an average of how all individuals express their values or understand their values. But it is possible that this person here didn't value achievement, but not so much power. But power was forced here because other people who valued achievement value power as well. So if the two constructs are together, it means that all individuals who value that as well. But someone might have not. That person will not be well represented in the structure over here on the map. They will be just forced on the map by the program. And basically what I did is I asked the program to tell me how well did each individual fit the structure. Did they fit the structure well or not so much? And I tried to predict in a sample, in a cross-cultural sample across 12 cultures. I created this structure for each one of the cultures and asked the program to tell me how much does each one of the children fit the structure. So basically, do their values conform to this theoretical structure of some values are compatible and therefore that you value them, then one, you're likely to value the other. Some values are conflictual. If you value one, you're likely to not value the other. And I predicted that the older children get, the more likely they are to fit the value structure. That's really complex. Am I coherent? Yeah? Yeah, nods. Right. I didn't get that as what I wanted. Not exactly, but almost. So what did we get? Basically, we found that the older children were, until about 10 years of age, the better they fit the sample. So the misfit decreased. The values were more in line with the theoretical idea. However, approaching adolescence, from 10 onwards, there was a chaos again. So what we tell ourselves here is that at the beginning, when children are cognitively developing, they learn to know the social world, but also themselves better. They learn to reconcile their values and understand what they find important and create this map of priorities that becomes increasingly coherent. But then as time tends to approach adolescence, and then their values start changing. For example, we saw that hedonism values are starting to change approaching adolescence. And when you start changing your values, some mess is coming inside. For example, if you value hedonism more, but you still want some safety. It takes time to reconcile the two sides, and in the meantime, your value structure becomes less coherent. But that's a lot of story for a little data, isn't it? So I'm trying to replicate that. We did that again, this time in a longitudinal sample. It's actually a prosocial sample. And we looked at children starting from the ages of 7 to 10. Each child was measured 3 times annually. So we had 3 measurement points. So they were at the end from 9 to 12. Again, we replicated the structure, bottom up. The values are organized as we expected, meaning that children who value one value are likely to value a similar value, an underlying similarly motivation to a similar extent, and likely to value a conflictual value to a lower extent. We looked at the misfit of each individual into that structure, so how well the structure describes the individual. And then we try to complicate it a bit more and look at that within individuals. So how the development occurs within individual. So for each individual, we had 3 time points. In each one of the time points, we knew how well they fit the structure. And then we looked at the process of change, the trajectory of change of that individual. So basically, is that individual becoming more coherent with time or less coherent in time, or just staying the same? And basically what we find is that with our youngest group of 7-year-olds, we found a decrease in misfit. So they became more coherent in their values with time. With the 10-year-olds, as they approach adolescence to 12, we found an increase in misfit. So they became less coherent with time. Basically, we find the same pattern in this sample as well. No one was as surprised as I was. But this tells us a bit, I think, about how the value structure is changing along time. So what do we learn from that? So although children's values appear to be there, they are not the same exactly as the values of adults. They are not accurately so. There might be still something to develop, something to mature. And why is that important? It is important because when the value structure is not as coherent, some issues occur. For example, we know that individuals that do not have a coherent value structure or have conflicts in their values are also likely to have lower self-esteem. Their well-being might be harmed by this dissonance of always trying to pursue 2 conflicting things. We know that at the moment we're showing in a current manuscript that individuals who have their values less coherent are more likely to change in their values over time. So their values are not as stable. They're in a process of development. And values may be less effective in promoting behavior if you don't know what you want. Do you want to have fun or do you want to be safe? So each time you're faced with a dilemma, it's really hard to choose. So values might not be as effective in promoting behaviors. How am I this time?
Great. About 25 minutes.
Whoa, was I really fast? God. So basically, really 25 minutes?
In total, including questions.
Okay, okay, so good. That was one way of looking at how values of children might be different from the values of adults. We have other studies. For example, we ask children about their values. We look at their perspective, how they understand their values. And we see that as children grow longitudinally, their values become more abstract. They use more abstract nouns to describe their values. They use more overall generalizations regarding their values. So their values are less concrete behaviors and more of general understandings of the world. We see that their values become more mental. So they describe more mental states when they talk about their values and less actual behaviors or actual situations. So in general, we see that values become more and more similar to what we define as values when we talk about adults. So in general, what we see here is that it appears that values are already existent in early ages. And what we find is that the study of personal values might be relevant already in middle childhood to learn about the goals that people use in their values, the goals that people use in their behavior, the way children understand themselves, the way they reflect about their behavior. We can use that in the context of moral behavior, because values in many ways are moral, but also in the context of other behaviors such as self-control, such as we have many other, such as risky behavior. We have many other measures. It shows us how behavior is internally motivated already in middle childhood. It's not what others expect me, it's what I'm using to pursue my goals. I'm part of the education school, and I typically find myself teaching either school counselors or teachers. So I would always like to finish with saying that I think these results are extremely important for educational studies. We often hear that the cure to all problems is to teach values to children. And I really find it important to first understand what values are there for children. First understand that children have values. They might change, they might deprioritize or reprioritize, but first let's respect the values that children already have and discuss them and learn with them and teach them in a process of co-development, joint development, and not just tell them what their values should be. And I think that concludes it. So, well, that's the direction. Thank you very much for your attention. And I want to really thank all my wonderful students and collaborators, and I'll be really, really happy to take your questions.
Great, Anna. Thank you so much. There's plenty of time for questions, so please, floor is open, especially for the young great colleagues. Please, Marina, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. I was wondering, so you mentioned longitudinal development of values, that you also look at situational differences, for example, between family situation or school situation within the same age group.
That was actually my PhD.
Okay.
So in my PhD thesis, I looked at the values across contexts and whether children are the same across context, varying across context. And we find, I was actually looking at adolescents. I don't know if the results will be similar with children. What we find is that first, there is situational difference. So values are not carried identically to each situation regardless of relevance, but still there's some kind of a core. So the person who is most achievement oriented in school is likely to be a bit of an achiever at home as well, but not as much.
And I had one more question. I found it interesting as it's a bipolar differentiation between self-enhancement and self-transcendence. And I thought whether there might be also some overlap, whether that bipolar differentiation is true in all situations. For example, children might expect reciprocity for when they help, so they might have some self-assurance in some situations.
I think the important thing is what is the motivation here. So you don't have to help always for self-transcendence goal. You can help for other goals as well. You can help because you want to conform to the societal rules. You can help because you want to promote yourself. So the question is, what is your internal goal? But also, I think it is important to say that people, although they have these coherent value structures, they still may have conflict in the value structures, and some behaviors are fusing different values together. So, for example, if you really want to change the lives of many people, you're likely to use self-enhancement values in order to become a leader in an NGO. So you're utilizing some goals in order to promote others. So there are many strategies in order to fuse different values and still live well with yourself. And people do that with comments.
I was wondering whether you find a lot of cultural differences here, and perhaps, for example, in particular, between religious and secular groups?
Sure. So there are cultural differences, there are consistent cultural differences, and there are also religious differences between religious and non-religious, more than between different religions, actually. So religious people have different values than non-religious people. And the power of the method is that it creates a same language that you can compare across groups. And we find equivalence in the meaning, but we do not find the same priorities across cultures. And I think when we look at the development specifically, I think what is most important is that we find, usually what we found currently is different similar processes of development leading to different outcomes. So that's what I usually find. Like we found here, we found a similar process of development across cultures, but it does not mean that the end state will be the same. Another important thing is that the variance within cultures is stronger than the variance between cultures.
I suppose the next, slightly related question is, do you find gender differences?
Yes, and again, I would say put the same caveat of more differences between genders, within genders, but than between genders, but they are consistent among children and adults. We found gender differences, and they are quite consistent. Interestingly, there was one really large study that found that there are more gender differences in more equality-oriented societies. So Northern Europe societies have more gender differences than Southern Europe societies. So it seems that equality allows women and men to depart in their values and not to become the same. But yeah, that's a big study, but it's one study.
Thank you. Hi, thanks very much. I'm sort of trying to get my head around how, in a study, you could distinguish reported values from social desirability effects, because I guess values are so socially laden, aren't they? And I guess you would expect to see differences in which are most socially reinforced across cultures and possibly for genders. And I'm sort of thinking, how could you, in a task, distinguish between values versus someone's ability to recognise what's socially desirable and their drive to give a socially desirable response? So I'm interested in how that is tackled.
It is not, and I'll tell you why it is not. We found, not me, I'm not taking responsibility for that, but researchers found that social desirability is actually meaningfully associated with values. So individuals who are typically answering the way they are expected to answer are also the same individuals who will answer that conformity values are very important and conservation values in general. So in a way, it becomes part of the variance, not external variance. But it is definitely self-report measure, and we do not know of a better way to measure values at the moment than self-report measures. With all these difficulties and all these.
So it could be that it's all picking up the value, but of conformity versus not. That's kind of the, in terms of if you conform, you'll answer one way, and if you don't, you'll answer another way.
So if you conform, you usually will report that conformity is quite very important. Another interesting thing about it, and I always find that funny to do it with my students, people always think that our values are the best. Like much more than our traits, for example. If you think about our traits, sometimes you can think about your traits being, I could work on that. But if you look at your values, you usually think that your values are wonderful. And you don't really want to change them that much. And sometimes at like classes, everyone talk about their values, and I'm thinking, oh my God, how could she say that? That's so non-desirable. But she really thinks it's great. She has no idea that I'm thinking that it's crazy, that she thinks hedonism is the most important value in the world. Like, come on, you Z generation. But I think some of this social desirability is embedded in that you really think your values, and you do learn them from the society. It is not indistinguishable from the society, but you really think they are really important because you learn them from the society and you see yourself reflected around them. Yeah, hope that's an answer.
Got it.
I was just interested in the difference between the lack of coherence that individuals have with their own values and the incoherence you can have with wider society. And I was just thinking maybe you could talk a little bit more about that, maybe how it relates to adolescence as well.
So we do find that many researchers try to find whether values are associated with well-being. And there are a number of theories that are trying to parse this out. If people who have specific values are more likely to be happy in their life. And I think what I'm most convinced at the moment is that it is not about your values, but about your fit. So when your values are in a good fit to your environment, you're more likely to be happy. For example, we have a study, we looked at adolescents and their classmates. So at least in Israel, you have a homeroom class and you're spending most of your day with that homeroom class, even in high schools. So you're going with them and you're studying with them sometimes for 3 or up to 6 years, and most of your classes are together. And when your values were quite farther away from that class, you were not as happy as when you were closer to them. So I think that's really important. And although it did differ by type of value, so the people who were self-enhanced, but their class was self-transcendent were quite okay, but the opposite was not as good. When you look at the values within the self, I think we don't have enough data on that. I do have data from my PhD that show that people whose values differ across contexts had lower self-esteem. So children, especially in early adolescence, who had a lot of differentiation across contexts in their value content, were not as happy as the ones who did not. But that was culture associated as well. And I think that was attenuated with adolescents. Maybe the adolescents could tolerate flexibility better when they grew up, but that's speculation again. That's not the data.
Sorry, could I suggest in terms of parity between the hybrid digital colleagues and here, we take one question from the chat and then come back to you, and then Josh afterward. So we have a question from the chat. I'm just going to read it out to you. So it says, hi, I know you've briefly gone through this, but would you be able to explain a bit more how the pictorial task is designed to measure value? And what did you do to validate that it is measuring what you said it is?
Yeah. So the pictorial task was developed by Anna Doring and Wolfgang Bilski and in Munster University a few years back. It is basically creating 20 different pictures. Each one of the pictures is relevant to one of the Schwartz values. So 2 pictures for each one of the 10 values. In each one of them, there is this character, which is supposed to be unisex and supposed to be quite general, is taking on an action that is relevant to one of the behaviors. So maybe we'll go back to that. Yeah. So, for example, here that character is helping someone get up, and when the children see that character, they're also here to help others. And here they are looking at the stars, and they're here to discover new things. And the children are going through this protocol in which they are told, this is the character, you should try and think as if you are this character and imagine yourself doing these things. And then they see this list of 20. I do it with 10 values. I think 20 is too much. So 10 values at the same time. And they have this pyramid of empty spaces. And they are asked, choose the one that describes the thing that you most would like to do in your life. And they choose one of the items and put it up there. So now choose the one that is describing what you least want to do, what you least want to be in your life. And they put it down here. And then choose 2 more things that you do think are important for you to do in your life, and they choose 2 more, and they are in the second rung of the pyramid, 2 that are not so important, and there are 4 left that are stuck in the middle. And we do that again with 10 more items. There is actually at the moment also another measure for values that uses videos that are ranked in a different way, so taking a different approach. I actually like it because we find the same results with two completely different measures. But basically the way that the original authors validated it, they did it first using discussions with children, and then they let children fill it up, and they looked for the structure of values, not in the same method that you've seen before, but they looked at for the structure of values. So basically the interrelations between values to see that similar values are positively correlated, conflicting values are not correlated or negatively correlated. They use the old measure that was appropriate for early adolescence alongside this measure that can go as up as late childhood, early adolescence. They found that there are similar results. And I can tell you that I'm interviewing children about these values. They actually understand what they're talking about. They understand the stories. They do not understand to the same extent the complexity of it. But you know what? They understand quite a lot. Like the children sometimes tell me things like, you know, I do not to be really strong and powerful because I want my friends to like me. They understand even some of the trade-offs that are embedded in there. So I think children know quite a lot. Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Go ahead.
I really enjoyed this one. I was intrigued by the change of fit slope in the slopes that you presented. And I wanted to understand better what the change in fit means. Is it that there are somewhat random reasons across individuals why the fit might be less good, or is the change in fit also driven by those two dimensions, either self-transcendence and achievement? I forgot what the or conservatism and exploration.
Yeah, in a minute you'll have it. You're not supposed to remember that. Sure. Okay. That's even better. Yeah. So basically, I think that what we was looking for all this time is a method that can allow me to check whether children can understand the entire structure, the entire associations in one number. That's quite hard. So what we have here is for each one of the individuals, how are they fitting the description of that structure? So a person that perfectly fits the description means that if the association here is like 2, that will be 10, that will be 6, that will be 7. Why is that? Because that is closer, so they ranked it higher, they're closer here, they're farther away from that, and farther here. But if that individual did everything as I just told, but here they had 10, that was really far for them. They did not value hedonism much. That specific individual, then their fit will not be that good because I forced them into a structure that is created based on the entire sample. So we have people who are better fitting the structure. Obviously, many of them fit the structure well. Otherwise, we will not have a structure. The structure was created in a bottom-up process, but they do not fit the structure to the same extent. Is that clear?
Yeah, perhaps one last question, Josh.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for a really great talk. So I'm curious about how you interpret some of the wonderful research that's been coming out in the past couple decades by Robert and others, showing that babies and toddlers and really young children are driven by certain goals of benevolence and justice and conformity and certainly hedonism and self improvement and things like that. And they behave in accordance with these kinds of goals. Would you be prone to characterize these really, really young kids as potentially having budding values, or is it that kind of explicit representation of value structure and the ability to kind of think about values in relation to one another that you think constitutes that achievement, or what? I guess, yeah, how would you sort of define the acquisition of a value or the evidence that a value exists?
I usually don't think in stages. I don't find many things that develop in jumps, but gradual development. So I don't think that values emerged at 6 years of age, but I also think that gradually children start to reflect on who they are At the beginning, when you talk to children about who they are, they say, I'm tall, I have many friends. They do not say, I want to help others. So I think of my research as studying within the context of the moral self-development or self-development in general, because it requires this reflection on the self, and more than that, reflection on mental aspects of the self. I think that's double difficult. And I believe that once you can reflect on who you are and your goals, you become more committed to them. Because there is also self-affirmation already working on, and you have this understanding of yourself as a continuous entity. So children may help much earlier. They may want to help much earlier, but do they say, I'm a person who helps? Some research shows that they can do that if you really help them at 4 years of age. Do you know anything earlier than that? I don't think so. So about 4 years of age, they can answer the close-ended question and say, I'm more helpful than harmful. And I think that is a really big shift that creates this strategy that can be useful in order to create further behavior, to create continuity in behavior.
Great, thank you.
I would say let's thank Ella again, and if there are other questions, there's plenty of time afterwards. But thank you again so much, Ella, for your time and for your presentation.
Thank you very much.